The most important part of this video is in the first 60 seconds. So if you skip ahead, you might as well skip the whole video. When we're talking about the best prime lens for the Canon M50, the most important thing that we need to know is, does the focal length suit the situation that we want to use it in? And if you don't know what focal length is, it's that little number on the side of the lens. The kit lens comes with a 15 to 45 focal length. That means that you can change the focal length between 15 and 45. And a prime lens only has one number on it, and that's because it's what's called a fixed focal length. That means it does not zoom in and out. And the reason this is so important, and the reason when we talk about the best prime lens for the Canon M50, we absolutely have to take into account the focal length. If you can imagine you're going on a safari and you have got a 12mm or ultra wide angle lens, even if that is the sharpest, best lens that you can buy for this camera, it is not going to be very impressive when your little giraffe is only this big off on the horizon, or your elephant is this big off on the horizon. That is just not the lens for that purpose, regardless of how good the lens is. And if you're inside a church or a cathedral or a beautiful building and you want to capture all the architecture and artwork on the walls, you don't want a really zoomed in portrait or telephoto lens. That is just not going to tell the story or be the right focal length for that situation. So the most important thing about picking one of these prime lenses for your Canon M50 is determine which focal length you need or which focal length you enjoy using the most. And before I jump into the lenses, I'm going to tell you an easy way to do that with your Canon M50 and the kit lens that you already have. As we go through these lenses, if you hear me talk about one of the lenses and you say, yes, that's the lens, that's for me, that is going to be the best prime lens for my Canon M50, I'm going to tell you how to test that theory. Take your kit lens, and if you look on the side of it, it's got the numbers going from 15 to 45. If you decide that a 23mm lens should be your next prime lens, if you think that is the best prime lens for you, take your Canon M50, take the kit lens, set it on approximately 23, and then spend the whole day shooting with the 23mm focal length on the kit lens. Now, if you find yourself saying, yeah, that's perfect, all the things I wanted to shoot work really, really well with that focal length, then we've identified that you were right. That is the right focal length for you. But what you might find at the end of the day is you say, nah, I wanted to be closer. I didn't get far enough in, or nah, I didn't get enough of the scene in. I wanted more of the scene in. Then think about one of the other lenses, think about their focal length, and then just take your kit lens, set it to that, and spend the next day or the next afternoon shooting at that. This is the most important thing by far in picking your next prime lens or your first prime lens for your Canon M50. All right, now that we've got that out of the way, I'm going to go through the lenses with you. I'm going to go through their good points, their bad points, their best attributes, and what I think each of the focal lengths or series of lenses or lenses in that range is good for. And the first lens we're going to start with is the Rokinon 12mm f2 lens. And this is a lens that I recommend probably as much, if not more, than any lens on the mount. And it is genuinely one of the best. It is one of the cheapest. It is one of the sharpest, and it is one of the widest. So this is a great lens for interior architecture, real estate photography, city when you want to get all the big buildings in, landscape when you want to get ultra wide landscape, and it is also an incredible low light lens and an incredible dedicated astrophotography and astro time-lapse lens. And I mainly use this for astrophotography and astro time-lapse, but I have also used it for professional interior shoots for real estate. And I've also used it in sort of cathedrals or historic buildings where I want to get inside and there's not a whole lot of light and I want to get everything in. This is a really, really good lens for that. Some people do get a bit afraid of the manual focus, but on an ultra wide lens, manual focus is really, really easy. because the wider the lens is, the greater the depth of field you have is, which means the area between where the image is out of focus and in focus. So the wider the lens is, the deeper that area that is in focus is in. So this is actually a lens that you can set at an aperture of f4, which you just set on the lens. You can set it at infinity or just under infinity focus, and you can walk around and everything from about a meter from you all the way to infinity, or as far as you can see, is going to be in focus. So with the ultra wide angle lenses, you really don't have to worry about being afraid of manual focus. Another amazing thing with this lens is its ability to do a very close focus, and this creates a really surreal and incredible effect where you can take a small object or a person or something and get really close to them, get a close focus, and then you just get this amazing area and this amazing background spread around behind them. It's really quite a unique look, which you can only achieve on an ultra wide angle lens with a close focusing ability. It's an extremely well built lens. It comes with a lens hood. It is a pleasure to use. Both the manual focus and the aperture ring are really nice to use, and it is ultra sharp. One of the sharpest lenses you can get on this mount. But of course, that's only good for you if you want to use that really wide 12mm field of view. Another wide angle lens for this mount is the Sigma 16mm f1.4. Now, this is an autofocus lens as opposed to the manual focus lens of the Rokinon. 16mm doesn't get you quite as wide an angle, but you do get autofocus. Now, this is a very sharp lens. It actually isn't as sharp as the Rokinon, but it is a very sharp lens, and it is one of the favorite lenses on this mount. If you've watched any of my videos before, you've seen this lens in action, because it is the lens I use for almost all of my videos, and the talking head segments that you see are shot on this lens. I've just swapped out for another lens just so I've got it so you can see it on the camera and kind of see how it fits on the M50 body. I've also, rather than just showing the lens on its own, I thought I would show you all these lenses on the M50 body. It just gets you an idea of the size of the lens in comparison to the camera. Now, of the lenses that I've got here, this is the biggest and the heaviest, but I actually think it is okay on the M50 body. It's not so heavy that I feel like I can't get a good grip on it. And in fact, this lens, I don't know, it just feels really well built. I think it's a nice looking lens, and it's a pleasure to own. It is just one of the nicest lenses for the mount. This is a great lens, particularly for these YouTube style shots, and I think it is probably the best lens for these talking head YouTube style shots. It's also great, a walk around of vlogging video lens. It's a great sort of low light documentary lens if you're in the city at night or with family, or you're sort of indoors with low light situations. The aperture opening to 1.4 is a really wide opening. It lets a lot of light in, and it makes it so your camera doesn't have to work so hard to get the image for both video and photo. So it is great for both video and photo. The one thing I would say with some of these wider angle lenses, particularly if you're a beginning photographer, it is a lot harder to compose a moving or meaningful image with a wide angle lens. It is much easier to compose an image that you're happy with, that you think looks like something a professional photographer would have taken, with some of these longer focal lengths, some of these lenses that are a bit more zoomed in. And a lot of that has to do with two things. One, the wider angle lens is getting a whole bunch of stuff in the scene, so it's a lot harder to compose your image so you've got a clean image, so the person's eye or the viewer's eye is drawn to the right place. The other thing is the more telephoto or more zoomed in lenses actually make it easier to get a blurry background, which is something that a lot of new photographers are trying to achieve, and a lot of people see as a sort of a professional style or professional looking photography. I really love this lens for video, but I almost never use it for photo, because if I am doing sort of landscape or time lapse or astro, I use the Rokinon lens. And this lens is just a bit more cropped in, so it's not as good for that sort of stuff. But it's also sort of a medium focal length, which gets a whole bunch of stuff in and makes it a little bit harder for me to compose a moving image in sort of general walk-around photography type stuff. So this is mainly a video lens for me. but it can do double duty as an astro wide angle lens and as a video lens. So if you do both of those things, you can actually buy this and do all that and sort of leave the Rokinon out if you want. Although the Rokinon is definitely a better dedicated astrophotography lens if that's something that you're into. The next two lenses I'm going to talk about together because they are 22 and 23 millimeter lenses. So a very similar focal length and very different in size. So the first one we're going to talk about is the 22 millimeter Canon lens. This is a 22 millimeter f2 lens. And as you can see there, that makes for a very small package of your camera. It really makes your M50 nearly pocketable. And this is a lens that I think has to be considered not just for the amazing image quality it provides, and because of the really useful all-purpose focal length that 22 millimeters provides, but just because of the size. It just makes your M50 so small and so inconspicuous. It puts you in a position where people just, if you're doing street photography or you're at a party or something, it's not a big standing out lens in people's faces. It's just a tiny little point and shoot. And in fact, setting up your camera like this will even allow you to take photos and video in areas where they might see a bigger lens or a bigger camera and think you're a professional photographer, or you're a serious photographer where they don't allow photography or videography. Often you can actually get away with it with a tiny package like this. And I have used this setup just like that for that specific purpose. Now, 22 millimeters is a great all-purpose focal length. It's great for photography. It's great for video. It's a great walk-around video lens. This is considered the ultimate sort of street photography focal length. So if you see a lot of the classic street photography is done with this focal length, I personally prefer something a little bit tighter, a 32 to 35 millimeter focal length, but this 22-23 has traditionally been the street photography focal length. It's also very good for what I would call environmental portrait, which is where you're getting a picture of a person and they are the main subject in frame, but you're also getting some of the environment around them. So it is a picture of a person, but also showing the environment. So it might be somebody at work or somebody at a party or somebody in a city. So it is a great all-purpose walk-around focal length. Now, coming in at 23 millimeters is a lens that is much bigger, but is also considered much brighter. And by brighter, what we mean is it lets a fair bit more light in. Now, this one is the Viltrox 23 millimeter f1.4. And as you can see, that is a much bigger lens. This is a much bigger package, and it's much more conspicuous. The lens is also silver, which is kind of cool, but really kind of stands out. So you're not going to be very stealthy with this one. But for me, for all-purpose walk-around video in low-light conditions, this is my number one lens, and it just renders some incredible image quality. It just has, at f1.4, it has just got this sort of dream-like effect to it. I don't know what it is, but there is some sort of X factor with this lens on this camera that I think produces an image that really is quite magic. Once again, it's also a good walk-around focal length for photography, street photography, general use photography. And if you don't care about your camera being small, you don't mind it being a little bit bigger and a little bit heavier, this is a better lens optically, and it lets more light in. And also, this is a lens that recently is available on the Fuji system mount, and they did a comparison between this lens and one of Fujifilm's latest, most high-quality, sharpest lenses they've ever made. And this lens was almost line ball in its ability to resolve detail and sharpness. We can confidently say that this is one of the sharpest lenses you can buy on an APS-C sensor camera, which is the type of camera that the Canon M50 is. Now, moving up from this is a kind of a niche lens. It is the 28 millimeter f3.5 macro lens. And now this is a lens which I I really thought I was not going to like this lens, and I bought it thinking I would probably be selling it only days later. But in fact, I love this lens, and it gets me some images and some effects and some close-up macro photo and video that just none of the other lenses in the lineup can get me. And it's a collapsible lens, so it's quite small, it's lightweight. It has two different choices when you open it up between macro and super macro. Super macro gets you really, really close where you're almost touching it, and macro is back a little bit further. When it's in the normal macro mode, it's also a normal lens, so you aren't stuck with just taking macro photo or video. You can walk around and do anything with it. The other thing about this lens, which is quite unique, is that it has lights on it. So one of the problems with getting close-up macro photo and video is as you get close to something, the lens actually shades the object that you are trying to get a photo or video of. And this creates a problem because it doesn't create a very good image. So Canon was the first company to actually put little LED lights on the end of the lens. And it's not a lens that you're going to use like to take flash photography of somebody that's a meter away. But the LED lights are bright enough to light up a small subject when you are very close to it. And there are a few different settings, different brightnesses, and you can also light it from sort of one side or the other. So it's really quite a unique lens. And there's the other side. Yeah, quite a unique lens. And I use it a lot for sort of B-roll style video and product photography and video. I also use it on my eBay listings when I have something that I want to show the detail on. I can get really close. So the thing I really like about this lens is it gets me shots that I can't get with any other lens. But unless you're really interested in macro photo and video, I think it is kind of a niche lens. Yes, it can be a good all-around walk-around lens and all-around focal length for just general photography and video. It is also image stabilized. It's the only lens in this lot that is image stabilized. But I think it's really only for people who are interested in mainly doing macro and then also doing some of these other things. Stepping up from that, we have 3 more lenses, all of a similar focal length. We have the Canon 32mm f1.4. We have the Viltrox 33mm f1.4. And we have the Sigma 30mm f1.4. And I put these all in the same category, and they all do a kind of similar thing. Now, for me personally, this is my favorite focal length for head to waist portrait style shots and walk around street photography. This is also my favorite focal length just for walk around photography in general. So if I had to have one focal length glued on this camera permanently, this would be the one. I find it extremely versatile. And unlike the 22, where sometimes I feel like it just lets a little bit too much in, for photography, this just gets me cropped in a little bit better and allows me to isolate my subject a little bit better. Now, if you are doing video, I think that 22, 23mm focal length is better. If you're primarily photo, I think this 32, 33, 30 focal length is better. Now, in comparing these 3 lenses, they're all extremely good, and I would have no hesitation to recommend any of the lenses in this lineup. I would say in the comparisons that I have seen that the Canon 32mm f1.4 is the best of the lenses. It's the sharpest lens, and it has the best color rendering and detail. Having said that, both of the other lenses are excellent, and depending on the prices at the time, they can be much, much cheaper. This 32mm f1.4 is the most expensive lens on this mount. It is also technically, in the sharpness and detail that it renders, it is the best lens on the mount. So maybe a get what you pay for thing. But if you're looking to buy another lens, and this lens and the prices you're looking at is double the price of either the Sigma 30mm or the Viltrox 33, I would have no hesitation to go with the cheaper lenses and use that extra money towards another prime lens, probably one of the 23mm lenses in the lineup. And with all of these lenses, I will hit links in the description down below. I do try to keep an eye on any deals are out and find the best prices and update those links regularly. So if you are interested in the current pricing on any of the lenses you're looking at, I will have them linked in the description down below. Now, our next step up in focal length from the 32mm lens is it's actually not a native lens, but it is an extremely popular lens on this mount, and that's why I'm including it. And that is the Canon 50mm f1.8 adapted. So you have to have an adapter to make this work. It does make it a fair bit bigger. You don't have to use the lens hood, and I use the lens hoods on just about everything, but this one does come with a pretty big lens hood, and that has to be bought separately. And if you don't have one of these lens hoods for this, yeah, I recommend it. It actually helps with color and contrast. It makes your image sharper, and it protects the lens. So I'll put a link to that in the description below as well. But a couple nice things about this 50mm Canon lens. The first thing is it's cheap. It's probably the cheapest lens in the whole lineup that we're talking about today. The second thing about it is it can be used with either a direct adapter or the Viltrox speed booster. So when you add this Viltrox speed booster, you effectively get two lenses in one. So now you're getting the 50mm with the crop sensor, and then you put the Viltrox speed booster on it, and it has the field of view similar to your 32 to 35mm. So it is like two lenses in one. Now, the Viltrox speed booster setup is not a perfect thing, but just for this conversation, it is a versatile lens because of that. It also is reasonably light and isn't too big on the Canon M50, and I think it works quite well. It does not have the image quality of the other lens that is available in this sort of focal length class, and that is the Viltrox 56mm f1.4. That is an absolutely excellent lens, and if you are after a lens for portrait shots where you're blurring the background, either getting head and shoulder shots or head to waist shots, or even when you're back further, getting a whole family or a couple of people in, that is the lens I would recommend. And that lens gives you the strongest ability to get some subject separation and get that blurry background that most people are so keen on. So I think a lot of times when people first take photos with their kit lens and they're taking a picture of people, what they're expecting or what they're hoping to see is that person really clear, lots of detail, and then a blurry background. And if that's you and that is your number one thing you're trying to achieve and you've been disappointed with your photos so far because of that, then I would absolutely recommend the Viltrox 56mm f1.4. I'm just editing this video and realized that I have left off the other 56mm focal length lens for this mount, and that is the Sigma 56mm f1.4. Now, all the basic qualities I'm saying about the Viltrox in this video can be said for the Sigma as well. The Sigma lens is a little bit more expensive, but it's also a little bit better. I think there's about a $150 difference between the two lenses right now, and I think the Sigma is probably about $150 difference better lens. So I don't think you can go wrong with either. If you're on a budget, buy the Viltrox. If you're not worried about the money, buy the Sigma. It is a somewhat specialized lens in that it is really good for that type of shooting specifically and not a whole lot more, because that image is so zoomed in. If you're walking around trying to get video, it is almost useless for video. If you're walking around trying to get photo, unless your subjects are off in the distance or you're getting them to stand still and staged and get them, you don't have a whole much wide scene getting in. So you're really are going to have to slow things down and try to get in. So that is not a very versatile focal length. It is a great focal length for portrait family photos and stuff like that, though. So if that is your number one priority, then that is my number one recommendation. My number one goal on this channel is to help you get the best possible results in photo and video with the gear that you can afford or the gear that you already have. So if that's something you're interested in, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification.